Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we sift through the dense stack of sources so you can get straight to the aha moments.
Glad to be here.
Today we are sailing into, well, a really fascinating 10-year-old contradiction. The beloved pirate fantasy, Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, when a game inspires a decade-long development cycle for a spin-off, like the recently released Skull and Bones, it really makes you want to re-examine the source material, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
AC4 isn't just a great game, it's become this huge cultural phenomenon. It basically defined the golden age of piracy for a whole generation of players.
And our mission today is exactly that. A proper deep dive into the historical timeline, specifically 1715 to 1722. We want to figure out where AC4 deliberately chose, narrative stakes and immersive fun over documented reality.
Yeah.
The tension here is huge. I mean, for millions of you listening, Black Flag is the ultimate pirate simulator.
It really is. But we need to look beyond just the adrenaline rush of the naval combat and the thrill of sailing the Jackdaw. This conversation, I think, is really about the philosophical struggle the game kind of stumbled upon.
Yeah.
You have this brutal, often selfish reality of piracy on one hand versus the romanticized ideal of chaotic freedom on the other. We're really searching for the real historical price of Edward Kenway's journey. What did it all actually mean?
Okay, let's unpack the foundation of the game's world then. The entire premise, pretty much, rests on the existence of the Pirate Republic in Nassau.
Right.
In the game, it's this symbol of political freedom, like a bastion where pirates threw off the shackles of colonial control and, organized themselves.
And that right there is the first really major piece of historical myth-making we need to tackle.
Okay.
Historians are very, very clear on this. A self-governing, organized, functional polity, a true republic, it just never existed in Nassau, not like that.
So what was Nassau then? Between, say, 1713 and 1718, if it wasn't a republic, what were all those famous pirates? Blackbeard, Hornigold, Vane, even our fictional Kenway. What were they doing there?
What you had was essentially a transient base, a hangout spot used by various pirate companies.
Okay.
They were loosely associated, sure, and sometimes apparently referred to themselves as the Flying Gang.
Right, the Flying Gang.
Yeah, but it was really just a temporary staging ground. A place where they could maybe resupply, maybe party a bit between successful raids. In reality, it was pretty much a total state of anarchy.
Anarchy, not government.
Exactly. Not a functional government with laws or shared political ideals or anything like that.
That significantly undermines the political gravity the game assigns to it, doesn't it?
It really does.
If it wasn't some kind of political movement, where did this powerful idea of a pirate republic even come from? Did the pirates themselves promote this sort of lofty vision?
No, not really. The pirates didn't invent the phrase. The sources we looked at point out that the earliest known use of pirate republic was way back in 1709.
Okay.
And it was a purely fictional account, a story by Adrian Van Broek about Henry Every in Madagascar. Pure storytelling.
Fiction.
Right. The idea then got massively popularized much, much later in 2007 by Colin Woodard's book, Republic of Pirates, which, framed the era very powerfully. Contemporaries at the time did sometimes refer to Nassau as a commonwealth, apparently.
Oh, Commonwealth, okay. But in this context, that wasn't a governmental structure either.
Not at all, no. It was more like a metaphor. It suggested a place where people lived in common, common lawlessness maybe.
Right.
But it wasn't a description of an actual system of governance.
Right.
Our sources are pretty emphatic on this. The motivations of the historical pirates were incredibly simplistic. Basic, even.
How so?
It was purely transactional. Basically, make money, spend money. That was the goal. They had no complex common government, no shared political philosophies about freedom. And actually, contrary to all the dramatic battles you see in the game,
Yeah.
the majority of the real Flying Gang ultimately just accepted the royal pardon offered by the English authorities. They took the deal.
Wow, okay. That makes the game's entire conflict feel, well, far more artificial. It seems like the historical reality just didn't have those high stakes needed for a great narrative.
It didn't, not in that political sense. Until one particular historical event happened that really gave the Flying Gang the fuel they needed.
What was that?
The 1715 wreck of the Spanish treasure fleet off the coast of Florida.
Ah, right. The sources describe that as the real catalyst for growth in Nassau.
Exactly. Before 1715, Nassau was pretty sparsely populated. Maybe just Benjamin Hornigold and like 70 or so associates.
That's not many.
No. But after the Spanish treasure fleet got smashed up by a hurricane, Suddenly there was this huge amount of accessible wealth just lying there, or near there.
Right, easy pickings.
Kind of. Most of the people we now call pirates back then were initially just, well, treasure hunters trying to salvage gold from the wrecks.
Okay.
Or, maybe more opportunistically, they were robbing the Spanish crews who were doing the legitimate salvaging. People like Captain Henry Jennings got their start that way.
I see.
This sudden influx of plunder, combined with a total lack of any real oversight, transformed Nassau almost overnight into this chaotic boomtown.
So the chaos that Kenway and his friends thrive in, it wasn't born from some utopian philosophical ideal of liberty. It was born from a sudden gold rush and simple criminal opportunity.
Precisely.
Yes.
And this is really the necessary foundation for discussing the game's most, maybe, dramatic piece of historical rewriting.
Which
The
is
villainization of Woodes Rogers.
Rogers, yeah. The colonial governor. He's basically the main antagonist in AC4, isn't he? He represents the crushing hand of authority, determined to extinguish the pirates' freedom.
He does in the game.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe, frankly, a bit uncomfortable for fans of the game.
How so?
Historically, Woodes Rogers is considered a monumental colonial hero.
A hero.
Yeah. And when we look at the documented activities of the actual Nassau pirates, and look, this is a difficult truth to swallow, maybe.
Yeah.
They were confirmed thieves, rapists, slavers, and torturers.
Wow, that.
It is. They never once liberated slaves, quite the opposite in many cases. And they absolutely held, supremacist views of themselves over the crews they captured or the people they encountered.
So we're talking about real documented atrocities here, things the game just completely airbrushes over to make the pirates the protagonists you root for.
It absolutely does. And Rogers' historical action ending the Flying Gang's operation there in Nassau was actually remarkably bloodless in 1718. He achieved it primarily through offering that pardon we mentioned earlier.
The pardon most of them took.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you strip away the whole Templar versus assassin framework the game imposes,
Yeah.
the game fundamentally makes you root for these, well, unrepentant criminals, while the person who restores a semblance of civil order and stops the chaos is portrayed as the bad guy.
I think we need to just sit with that for a moment because the game's success clearly suggests the audience accepts this kind of moral trade-off. Why did the narrative need Woodes Rogers to be the villain? What was the function?
Well, it really comes down to sustaining the stakes, doesn't it? Since the historical pirates lacked any real complex common government or political ideals.
Right, no republic.
Exactly. The game couldn't manufacture a believable political conflict with real staying power just based on historical fact.
So they needed an external conflict.
Precisely.
Oh.
By introducing the Templars and having them leverage a historical figure like Rogers, it instantly creates that high-stakes, almost black and white conflict the game needs. Templar control versus assassin freedom.
But the price of that narrative convenience is huge.
It is. It's the complete sacrifice of this historical context and essentially the slandering of a man who, by historical accounts, brought much-needed stability back to the region. It turns a story of necessary criminal suppression into this grand fight for liberty.
It's a powerful lesson, really, in how historical media shapes our understanding. When fiction becomes the main way people engage with history,
Yeah.
the audience risks maybe cheering for the very brutality they might otherwise condemn.
That's a very real danger, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so leaving the messy fictional politics of the Pirate Republic behind, let's move to the mechanical heart of AC4. The naval combat and the ships themselves.
Right, the fun stuff.
If the historical plot was basically a fantasy designed to create high political stakes, I guess it follows that the ships had to be equally fantastical to support that level of, well, fabricated warfare.
That makes perfect sense, yeah. The combat needed huge, dramatic ships that could, blast each other apart in spectacular ways.
Exactly, big explosions.
Big explosions. But the historical fleet and the tactics they used, they are, technically speaking, far more grounded, and consequently, maybe far less cinematic for a video game.
So what's the main issue?
The fundamental problem is one of scale and geography.
Scale, how do you mean? The ships felt epic, ready for these huge transatlantic voyages.
And that epic scale is completely contrary to the reality of the Caribbean during the golden age of piracy.
Okay.
The vast majority of vessels were small, really small. We're talking canoes, small sloops, and things called piraguas.
Sure.
Yeah, they had to be small. The Caribbean Sea is incredibly treacherous. It's choked with shoals, reefs, areas of extremely shallow water. Trying to command a massive man of war like you see constantly in the game, in those waters, It was logistically expensive, incredibly difficult, and just plain dangerous. You'd run aground constantly.
Okay, so what exactly is a piragua? You mentioned that. The term sounds kind of exotic.
It's essentially a large canoe, often propelled by oars as much as sails.
Ah, oars.
Yeah, very important. It was swift, had a very shallow draft, meaning they could navigate places large ships couldn't even dream of going, and was often armed with swivel guns.
Okay.
So if we were trying to make a list of the accurate common vessels for that time and place, you'd probably replace the in-game gunboat with a canoe.
Right.
The schooner maybe becomes a piragua, the brig becomes a sloop, much smaller sloop usually.
And the man of war?
That becomes maybe a small frigate, possibly armed with 40 cannons at the absolute most. But even those were rarer for pirates. Speed and maneuverability were everything, not raw firepower or thick armor.
Okay, let's focus on the Jackdaw then, Edward Kenway's iconic ship. It's listed as a brig in the game, but it feels huge. What are the specific technical flaws in its design?
Well, first off, it's massively oversized for a brig of that period. Just way too big.
Right.
And it carries far, far too much canvas, too many sails. Most glaringly, it features royals.
Royals.
Yeah, that's the fourth tier of sails rigged way up high above the top gallants. Now, royals technically existed, but they were incredibly rare before the late 1700s, well after the pirate era.
Why were they so rare?
Because they made the rigging super complex, required huge amounts of maintenance, and honestly, they made the ship incredibly unstable, especially in heavy weather. They added very little speed for a lot of risk and effort.
So what was standard then, around 1715?
Standard was probably 3 sails per mast, maybe 4 in very specialized circumstances on larger naval vessels, but not the complex, multi-tiered rigging we see all over the place in the game. That's more late 18th, early 19th century.
Huh. I remember spending hours customizing the look of the Jackdaw, though changing the color of the sails, the look of the wheel. Were those details accurate at all?
The customizable wheels. Pure fantasy.
Yeah.
Nice touch for gameplay, but not historical.
And the sails. Could you dye them different colors?
No, not really. Sails were functional, made of heavy canvas, usually flax or hemp. They weren't dyed or decorated historically.
Really? Not at all.
Well, our sources mention maybe one temporary exception. Pirates might apply black pitch or tar to their sails for total camouflage during a night attack. But that was temporary, practical, not decorative.
Okay.
And really speaks volumes, doesn't it? For a game titled Black Flag, centered on the visual identity of a pirate.
The one piece of customizable iconography that was historically crucial, the actual pirate flag, the Jolly Roger itself. You can't design your own in the game.
That's true, you just collect preset flags.
It's kind of a huge missed opportunity for immersion, you'd think. A real shame for a pirate game. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now for the tactics. Let's talk about the ram. The ram feels critical for the game's combat loop, right? You use it to quickly take down disabled ships.
Oh, the ram. Yeah, that's an awful tactic, historically speaking, and a major anachronism for sailing ships.
Awful. Why?
Well, battering rams as a primary naval weapon were really abandoned by about the 6th century. And crucially, they were only ever effectively used on galleys-rowed vessels, not on sail ships.
Why not on sail ships?
Think about it. Ramming a square-rigged sailing vessel, which relies on wind and complex rigging, it would have been dangerously ineffective. You risk destroying your own rigging, losing control of your ship immediately, and likely splintering your own bow timbers for probably negligible damage to the target's hull. It's pure Hollywood flash, added for dramatic effect in the game.
Okay, so if ramming wasn't a thing for pirates, what's the single biggest tactical element the game is missing? Something that was actually paramount to real piracy.
Oars. Easily oars.
Oars again.
Yes. The game focuses entirely on wind and sails, managing your speed that way. But almost all Caribbean vessels of that era, even the larger sloops favored by pirates, were mounted with oars, or sweeps, as they were sometimes called.
And why were oars so critical?
Because they allowed pirates to maneuver effectively in battle, especially to get into an optimal position for boarding. And maybe most importantly, they allowed pirates to chase targets during a becalmed sea, when the wind just died completely.
Ah, right. No wind, no movement in the game.
Exactly. But historically, pirates would row furiously to gain an advantage in the dead calm, catch up to a merchant ship stuck motionless, and then engage. The game completely ignores oars in its combat mechanics, which is a major distortion of how the flying gang often operated and captured their prey.
Okay, let's move to firepower then. The game uses a system of standard shot, heavy shot, and chain shot. We know chain shot was real, used for destroying rigging, right?
Yep, chain shot and bar shot were definitely used for shredding sails and rigging. That part's accurate.
But what about the close-range weapons? The swivel gun, for example, is portrayed almost like a precision sniping tool. You use it to hit weak points on enemy ships.
Yeah, that's a massive distortion of what swivel guns were actually for.
How so?
Swivel guns were basically the closest thing pirates had to a machine gun. They were small cannons, mounted on the ship's railings, flexible, easily aimed by one person, and pirates loved them.
Okay.
So instead of just carrying two, like the Jackdaw does, used for niche sniping, a real pirate sloop might carry 8, 10, even 12 swivel guns scattered around the deck.
12. Wow. And what did they fire?
They weren't loaded with precision solid shot. They were loaded almost exclusively with scattering ammunition. Things like canister shot, or sometimes just bags, musket balls, nails, scrap metal, but basically like a giant shotgun shell.
Canister shot, can you quickly define that for people listening?
Absolutely. Think of it like a tin can, basically, filled with hundreds of small lead musket balls or bits of metal. When you fire the can breaks apart right at the muzzle, and it sprays that shot out in a wide cone.
Devastating at close range, I imagine.
Incredibly devastating against personnel. It was designed for suppressing the enemy crew, clearing the decks right before you boarded, maybe shredding nearby sails too. Not for precisely hitting a powder store from a distance.
Okay, that changes the entire logic of combat then. If pirates weren't using heavy cannons to punch holes in hulls, and swivel guns were anti-personnel weapons, how did they actually capture ships? Because like you said, in the game, you just blast the hull until the ship weakens and you can board, or it just explodes.
Right, that combat loop, blast in the hull until the ship sinks or explodes, is totally unrealistic for pirates of this era.
Why?
Pirate cannons, the ones typically mounted on sloops and small brigs, were generally too light. They fired maybe 4-pound or 6-pound balls. They just couldn't reliably pierce the thick oak hulls of larger merchant ships or naval vessels.
So what was the goal then?
The combat goal was always twofold: immobilize and demoralize. They focused entirely on destroying the rigging, using chain and bar shot, to stop the target from escaping, and destroying the enemy crew using canister shot from their main guns, and especially those swivel guns we talked about.
So cripple the ship, kill the crew?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Once the rigging was down and the deck was swept clear by swivel fire, most merchant ships surrendered immediately. They were defenseless, couldn't escape, and faced a bloody boarding action. Prolonged hull-to-hull cannon duels were rare, dangerous, and inefficient for pirates. Their goal usually was to capture the vessel and its cargo intact, not sink it.
That makes sense. Capture the prize, don't destroy it.
Exactly.
Okay, before we leave the technical details, let's briefly touch on the aesthetics and sound. We all remember those incredible sea shanties. Hugely popular. Are they historically accurate?
Well, the dialogue in the game and the use of period slang and dictionary terms are actually quite strong, quite authentic feeling for the most part.
But the shanties?
The term shanty itself is anachronistic. It didn't really appear until the late 18th century, maybe even early 19th.
Oh, really? So after the golden age of piracy?
Yeah. During the pirate era, the call and response work songs used for hauling ropes or raising anchor were much more rudimentary. Simple phrases like yo-ho, or short calls and responses. Not the complex narrative songs we hear in the game.
So songs like Drunken Sailor or the one about William Kidd?
Many of those famous complex songs featured in the game, like that slanderous broadside ballad about Captain Kidd, were popular entertainment songs of the period, or even later periods. They were sung for fun, maybe in taverns, but they weren't typically the rhythmic work songs performed while hauling ropes on deck.
Interesting. And the costumes. Edward's incredibly bombastic coat, the high boots, the thick layers. Practical.
Pure rule of cool overfunction. Completely impractical for the sweltering Caribbean heat.
Yeah, I always wondered about that.
All those thick layers, the heavy wool or leather coats, the high boots, the heavy fabrics, you'd overheat almost instantly. You'd be miserable.
So what did real pirates wear?
Practical, light clothing, linen shirts, loose trousers, maybe scavenged items. Things suited for heat and hard work. Even the most historically accurate outfit available in the game, supposedly Captain Morgan's redingote, it still had issues, like a heavy leather hat, which would just be unbearable in that climate day after day. The designers clearly leaned heavily into the romanticized, almost 19th century imagery of pirates, not the simpler, more functional garb of 1715.
Okay, so summing up this section. Black Flag is technically inaccurate in nearly every exciting detail. The ships, the tactics, the songs, the clothes.
Pretty much, yeah, when you hold it up to strict historical scrutiny.
Yet it's wildly successful. It seems the game successfully traded historical fidelity for an immersive, compelling fantasy.
Absolutely.
Which suggests the real strength of the game lies not necessarily in its historical setting, but maybe in the character navigating it.
I think that's right.
And that brings us neatly to Edward Kenway himself, the pirate at the center of this whole philosophical storm.
Yeah, Edward Kenway. He's arguably the narrative masterstroke of Black Flag. He really fundamentally changes the nature of the protagonist within the Assassin's Creed franchise, at least up to that point.
How so?
Well, he's presented as this morally gray outsider, right?
Yeah.
A Welsh privateer who turns to piracy, motivated purely by, well, selfish greed.
Right, he wants money.
He wants material wealth so he can supposedly live an honest life, which is really just his euphemism for running away from his existing responsibilities, particularly his wife back home.
So he's kind of the inverse of the standard assassin protagonist we'd seen before. He's not driven by duty or justice or avenging family.
Exactly. He's driven by material acquisition, self-interest. He starts off headstrong, cocky, super confident, and ends up losing pretty much everything because of that very recklessness.
That inversion is powerful, isn't it? It allows the narrative to use Edward as this, external, almost neutral party. It forces you, the player, to critically evaluate both the assassin and the Templar ideologies through fresh eyes.
Yeah, he's just a pirate who only cares about himself, suddenly thrown into this ancient, millennia-old conflict between pure freedom and absolute control. He doesn't get it at first.
And his entry into the assassin world is maybe the most brazen narrative shortcut in the entire franchise. He literally just steals the robes off a dead rogue assassin, Duncan Walpole.
It's brilliant staging, though, honestly. It instantly provides the iconic assassin imagery and the necessary gameplay mechanics, the hidden blades, the parkour context.
Right, gets you into the action fast.
Yeah, while simultaneously confirming narratively that Edward has absolutely zero connection to or understanding of the Creed itself at this point. He just stole the uniform.
And his customized robes later on, with the added pistol holsters and the padded shoulders, they look different.
They do. They feel cannibalized, modified, focused purely on combat utility for a pirate. It visually reinforces that he stole a costume and adapted it, distancing him visually and philosophically from the uniform ideology of the Brotherhood.
So the ultimate theme of the game then really becomes this deconstruction of free will, viewed through Edward's initially very selfish lens.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Edward yearns for the absolute freedom that the assassins seem to preach, the ability to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. But he fundamentally loathes the sense of responsibility that a truly functional freedom requires.
Responsibility.
Yeah, that tension freedom versus responsibility becomes the entire thrust of his personal story arc.
And we see that failure of responsibility played out in the Pirate Republic itself, don't we? In the game, it collapses not just because of Woodes Rogers and the Templars.
Right. Historically, the collapse of Nassau as that pirate den was due to pretty mundane things. Poor governance, the lack of any real economy, and eventually an outbreak of disease. Basic societal breakdown.
And the game uses that historical failure.
It uses it brilliantly to demonstrate that Edward's initial brand of chaotic, purely selfish freedom is inherently unsustainable. It leads to ruin, both for the community and for him personally. He realizes the constant pursuit of gold has cost him every meaningful relationship he had. His friends die or betray him because of the life he chose.
This forces that really core philosophical question, doesn't it? How free should we allow free will to be? The sources you mentioned bring up the harm principle here.
They do, yeah. Edward's early life in the game is basically defined by violating the harm principle, the idea that you should be free to do whatever you like, so long as you do no harm to others.
And Edward is constantly harming others for his own gain.
Constantly. The game subtly suggests that when you allow pure, unadulterated free will without responsibility to run rampant like the pirates did, you just get chaos, cruelty, and eventual self-destruction.
And in that context, the Templars, who are seeking order and peace through control, they almost seem justified in ending the Pirate Republic, don't they? Since the pirates were, from that perspective, just self-serving criminals causing harm.
It creates a very complex moral gray area, absolutely. If the Templars represent absolute control, which we know is bad, but chaotic freedom is also shown to be catastrophic. Where does Edward Kenway find his path? How does he find true freedom?
So how does his redemption arc play out?
His redemption really begins when he has this necessary, almost like a midlife crisis moment. He realizes that the relentless search for gold and using the observatory just for material wealth is completely hollow.
He has the wealth, but nothing else.
Right. He has riches maybe, but no friends left, no real purpose beyond acquisition. It's only then, really in the final stages of the game, after this internal transformation starts, that the assassins actually induct him properly.
What specifically defines that transformation? What's the turning point?
I think it's his final decision regarding the observatory. That ancient ISU device, basically a super surveillance machine that can monitor anyone in the world.
Okay.
Edward chooses, ultimately, to retrieve the artifact needed to control it and then seal the observatory away forever. And he makes that decision, the narrative emphasizes, out of his own sheer will to do the right thing, to protect the privacy and freedom of the very same kinds of people he had previously plundered and harmed.
So he sheds his greed and finally accepts the responsibility that comes with being a true champion of free will, not just a champion of chaos.
Exactly. He understands the creed, finally.
You know, critics often argue that this specific arc, finding purpose not in revenge or following destiny, but in willingly choosing to accept responsibility and give back, makes Black Flag perhaps the most thematically successful Assassin's Creed game ever.
I think there's a very strong case for that, yeah. It tackles the creed's philosophical core head-on in a way few other games in the series have managed, before or since. Edward proves that just, stealing the robes doesn't make you an assassin. It's the conscious choice to uphold that philosophy of guardianship, responsibility, and genuine free will that actually matters.
We probably can't conclude this section without briefly touching on the modern-day context in the game. Playing as the unnamed employee at Abstergo Entertainment, hacking computers, uncovering files, and tracking the reincarnated sage, Bartholomew Roberts. Why was that framing device so vital?
It provided the necessary gravity, I think, the stakes. The modern-day sequence constantly reminds you, the player, that these historical memories you're exploring aren't just fun history lessons or escapism.
Right.
They are weapons in a war that has spanned centuries. That phrase really sticks.
Yeah.
And when Bartholomew Roberts, the sage, admits to Edward in the past that he owes no allegiance to either the Assassins or the Templars, only to himself and his own chaotic goals, it really elevates the tension.
How so?
It shows that the struggle for humanity's future, the balance between order and chaos, freedom and control, is still incredibly active and complex. It's not just two sides. And it reminds you that the research Abstergo is doing now is part of that ongoing conflict. Critics often point to the absence of this kind of meaningful modern-day context in some later AC entries.
Yeah, they feel disconnected.
Exactly. It makes them feel more like just watching a movie or reading a history book rather than participating, even indirectly, in a living, ongoing struggle with real consequences. Black Flag nailed that connection.
So, when you put it all together, the enduring popularity of Black Flag, despite all the historical inaccuracies we've talked about, it's kind of proof, isn't it? Proof that historical accuracy and great game design can be mutually exclusive.
Sometimes, yeah.
Provided the core narrative structure, in this case, a deeply flawed individual finding a higher purpose is compelling enough to make you overlook the significant technical or historical shortcomings.
We love the fantasy fleet, we love the romanticized Pirate Republic, even though we know, intellectually, neither was really real like that.
Yeah, the fantasy works.
It does, and that massive success puts Ubisoft, the developers, in a really fascinating dilemma now. Because the rumors are very strong that a full remake of Black Flag is in development, maybe for 2025 or 2026.
Right, a remake, which forces them to answer a core question. What exactly is the legacy they're trying to preserve here?
Exactly. Will the remake attempt to, say, modernize the naval combat and the ships, make them more historically accurate, maybe like they tried to do in later AC games like Origins or Odyssey?
You mean smaller sloops?
Yeah.
More focus on muskets and swivel guns close in, maybe incorporating actual wind and oar mechanics, focusing on ship speed over just brute force?
Yeah, lean into the historical reality of Caribbean naval action more. Or, and this is the big question, will they feel forced to stick to the technically inaccurate but universally beloved pirate fantasy of the original?
Keep the giant Jackdaw, the massive broadside cannonades, the anachronistic ram.
Right. Keep it, because that's what people remember and love. That defines the core, explosive joy of the first game for so many. It's this inherent battle between fidelity to the game's established mechanics and fidelity to the historical era itself. Which do you prioritize in a remake?
That dilemma really brings us right back to Edward Kenway's final lesson, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, his journey taught him that selfish freedom, piracy without responsibility, is just inherently chaotic and unsustainable. It falls apart.
Right.
But if the Templars seek peace through total suffocating control, and the pirates prove that pure, unadulterated free will without structure is just destructive chaos, then what precise balance of freedom and responsibility is actually possible or even desirable for humanity?
That's the question, isn't it?
That ambiguity, that need for a difficult compromise, maybe is the really powerful idea Black Flag left us wrestling with, even if it took a completely fictionalized pirate war and a stolen assassin coat to deliver that message.
A philosophical prize well worth plundering, you might say.
Indeed. Thank you for diving deep with us today.